press. So good afternoon, everybody. Welcome. I am Emily, and thank you all for being here. I appreciate it's lunchtime, so if you are sitting down about to have your lunch, then bon appetit, enjoy. And welcome to the launch, the very first of our live webinar series called Moving Through Menopause. This is live, I am recording it. So for those of you that registered, I will send you a link to this recording. So if there is anybody that you think it also might benefit from hearing this stuff, then please feel free to share wider. Huge thanks, first of all, I'm going to have to read this bit out, to the Hertfordshire Health Protection Board and Hertfordshire Better Business for All, who are funding this live series of webinars. And their mission is to help local and independent businesses or small businesses in Hertfordshire recover after the pandemic. So how is this helping local small businesses recover after the pandemic? Well, because in the UK, menopausal women are the fastest growing demographic in the workplace. And yet there are said to be up to 1 million women in the UK who could quit their job due to symptoms of the menopause. And recently, a survey of 2,000 women with menopausal symptoms found that 63% of those women said that there was zero menopause policy at their workplace. So unless you've been hiding under a rock, you will have probably noticed that the menopause conversation in lockdown has grown in volume, in size, and there's some fantastic things happening. It's now in the curriculum. GPs now have an elective module to take in their training. Lots of good stuff happening. However, with anything, sometimes all of this information can get a bit overwhelming and a little bit difficult to understand sometimes. So what myself and Hayley, Beth, Caroline and Kate have come together to help do is try to simplify all of this for you to use, and to also signpost you to some really helpful stuff whilst you are moving through the menopause. So without further ado, I am going to introduce you to Hayley. I just want to say, if you have any questions, you can type it in the chat function. You can send myself a question privately, just send it to Moving Through Menopause, or you can pop it publicly as well. This is being recorded. I won't record the questions, just the chats, the presentations. The chats will be private and off air. I'll ask the questions to Hayley and Beth at the end. And if you could just make sure you're mute, and you don't have to have your camera on, you can have it off if you prefer. So over to Hayley firstly to introduce yourself, Hayley, and I shall mute.
Thanks, Emily. Good afternoon, everyone. And just to echo Emily's comments, thank you for being with us this lunchtime. I'm going to be talking for about 20 minutes, and then I'll hand over to Beth Hughes, who's going to talk for around another 20 minutes, which does give us plenty of time for Q&A at the end. So as Emily said, please do put your questions into the chat function, either to everyone, or if you prefer that they remain private, then send them to Moving Through Menopause. So who am I? I'm Hayley. I'm 44 years old. I live in Oxford in Kent with a very naughty sausage dog and my partner Matthew. And I've spent most of my career in the pharmaceutical industry, which may beg the question, what on earth am I here today? And the reason I'm here today is because just over a year ago, I had a subtotal hysterectomy for bad uterine fibroids, so non-cancerous growths. Subtotal meaning that my ovaries were preserved. And I wasn't told an awful lot about the operation other than what to expect on the day of surgery and for immediate recovery. So I did what any good human being does, and I got straight on the internet to perform my own research, which, as you all know, can be good and can be bad. And what I found was data to suggest that even though my ovaries were being preserved, that as they get some blood supply from the womb, that it was likely they would die off within 2 to 5 years. And that would therefore put me into menopause a little bit early. So I then wanted to do some more research to find out what was going to happen to me, what was going to happen to my body, now that I was going to be going into menopause early and my hormones were going to be sort of falling off a cliff. And that's when I think I got really angry, because what I found was that this area of women's health has actually historically been quite underserved. So perimenopause and menopause aren't mandatory training modules for GPs. It is there to do, but they're not mandatory. So this means you have to elect to do that module, and many GPs don't. Now, as Emily's already alluded to, the tide is turning. I'm sure many of you will have seen Davina McCall's programmes, and we do know that a lot of organisations are writing and embedding menopause policies, which is great to see, but there is a way to go. And so I guess the intention of my presentation today is to give you some top line facts, hopefully dispel some myths and some stigma, but really to empower you to make decisions and positive life choices at what can be a difficult time, as well as perhaps empowering you to have a potentially difficult conversation with a loved one, with an employer, a manager, or perhaps even your GP. So I should highlight, I'm not clinically trained. I've just done a lot of reading, a lot of listening, and quite a lot of desktop research to try and put this information into layman's terms, into bite-sized chunks, something that's digestible, and really enable you to make informed decisions about your health. So there is quite a lot to digest. Some of it is a little bit sciencey, so please do put those questions into the chat function. Okay, so let's get into it. Menopause defined. So I think the first thing to say is that menopause is completely normal, okay? It's meant to happen to us women, and 50% of the population will experience it. Now, the menopause itself is actually only one day. This is 1 year exactly after your last period. Prior to this day, you are perimenopausal, and after it, you are postmenopausal. So our periods stop as our ovaries run out of eggs. And as there are no eggs, this leads to a reduction in hormones, so estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone. And our bodies then react to these falling levels, which leads to the menopausal symptoms. So when will it happen? There are a number of factors that influence the when. These include genetics, underlying conditions, surgery, certain treatments, and the number of eggs that you have at birth. But it is important to know that although genetics can play a role, it doesn't always follow, you don't always follow what happened to your mum. So just something to be aware of. And at the bottom of the slide, you can see some of the more common symptoms. So we've got hot flushes, night sweats, mood changes, tiredness and insomnia, brain fog, headaches, joint pain, low sex drive, vaginal dryness, as well as urinary and bladder problems. And it's really important to listen to your body, be self-aware, and take note of your own experiences. And I did just want to touch on anxiety and depression a little bit more, because this can be so debilitating, often affecting women who have never suffered previously. And sometimes, upon a brave trip to the doctors, antidepressants are prescribed. And perhaps what could be needed is a bit of lifestyle and diet advice, and possibly even HRT. Okay, so this is a lovely visual. This is just showing us some of the common symptoms, and I do love a bit of a word cloud. So I'll give you a few moments just to have a look at this. It may be that one or many of these resonate with you. And thank you to Beth, who will be speaking after me, because I did steal this slide from her. Okay, so how long does the menopause last? So the average age for menopause is 51. And now, because of increases in life expectancy, typically women will live 30 years plus after. So we're living 30 years in postmenopause. Now, it is an individual experience. I feel like it's so important to be armed with the information. Please do seek that support and get that advice when it's needed. And even with minimal symptoms, make sure you consider all of your options. And I do include HRT, so hormone replacement therapy, within that. So postmenopause, the phase after menopause, you might still experience some symptoms. And actually, most people have symptoms up to 4 years after their last period. And 1 in 10 people will have symptoms up to 12 years after. Okay, so we've looked at menopause. So what is the perimenopause and what can we expect? Well, perimenopause is that period of time when your symptoms start, but before the official menopause stage. So you may still have periods, but there are very likely to be changes to these periods. So they could become more regular or less regular. They could become heavier. They could become lighter. You may experience some mood changes, the odd hot flush. Unfortunately, you may have more frequent headaches and PMS can worsen. And what's happening is that the ovaries are stopping working gradually over time, but this is with the exception of either a surgical or medical menopause, which I'll come on to shortly. And what's happening here is our body is reacting to these declining levels of hormones, but in particular estrogen. And this can be going on for several years before periods stop. But as I've said, it's an individual experience. And if any of you have teenage girls at home, I often compare this, the fluctuations in perimenopause, to that of puberty, albeit obviously a ramping up in puberty and a decline in perimenopause. So if there's someone going through the menopause and puberty under one roof, it can certainly make for a very interesting household. Okay, so contraceptives, hysterectomies, and menopause. Now, the reason I'm highlighting this is that because everything in that top box can mask what I've just shared. So if you don't have periods because either you've had a hysterectomy, you're taking certain contraceptives like the progesterone-only mini pill, or you have a Mirena coil fitted which releases progesterone, then all of these could make it harder to track the changes in your periods. And in this case, I would suggest it's really important to use tools and to track other symptoms, and that will help you identify change. So from personal experience, I found it really helpful to track my symptoms. I get excruciatingly sore boobs, and I use the Balance app, which is Dr. Louise Newson. So she's a menopause expert in the UK, but there are loads of different tools out there. So I'd suggest you get online and find one that really suits you. So if you're over 45, there is a high chance that you're already experiencing some symptoms of perimenopause. As I've said, keep an eye out for them, track them. Some of them are obvious, some of them are far more subtle. And I do think it's important to understand the impact of the hormonal changes, just so we can be more aware, which brings me quite cleverly and quite nicely onto my next slide. So hormones and the role they play. So we have receptors in our body that are responsible for receiving estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone. And we have receptors in our brain, in our joints, in our muscles, in our hearts, in the blood vessels, urinary tracts, in our eyes and our vaginas, so all over our bodies. And our bodies are used to getting a good supply of estrogen. Estrogen plays a protective role, so it protects arteries in the heart, it keeps bones healthy, it regulates our mood, it supports our brain power and memory, and it keeps those areas that need moisture lubricated, so the skin, the vagina, and our eyes. Now, this is why we really feel the hormonal changes that perimenopause and menopause bring about, because we have hormone receptors absolutely everywhere. And just a little bit more on hormones. So I'm sure you'll recognize testosterone as the male hormone, but women also have it as part of their hormonal makeup. It keeps bulk in our muscles, it regulates our sex drive, it helps with mental focus and concentration, as well as supporting our energy levels. Progesterone, well, it regulates menstrual cycles, It's important during pregnancy as it has a protective role, and it can also be part of HRT where it keeps the womb lining thin and healthy. And progesterone has an anti-inflammatory effect and has quite a calming effect. Now, the reduction in hormones during perimenopause and menopause will give rise to a variety of symptoms across the whole of our body because, as I've mentioned, those receptors are no longer receiving the same amount that they were used to. Okay, so I thought, given that we've spoken about hormones, and again, thanks to Beth for a great slide, it would be helpful just to have a look at the premenopausal menstrual cycle. So you can see at the top of the slide the ovulation process, and then you can see the levels of estrogen and progesterone on the bottom half, along with the days of the cycle on the x-axis right across the bottom there. Now, you'll only have progesterone if you are ovulating, and as mentioned before, it does have this anti-inflammatory and calming effect. But as you can see, both estrogen and progesterone fluctuate during our cycle, so it's not linear. They drop from high to low, and this is why we feel and behave differently at different points in our cycle. So you can see both estrogen and progesterone play their own role. And the next graph really demonstrates how they decline as we age. So it is a simple visual. It's quite clear to see. So if you look at the y-axis, we've got the hormone levels down the left, and across the bottom, we've got our age. And you get that rapid decline between the ages of 35 and 50. So there's a 35% reduction in estrogen and a 75% reduction in progesterone. Now, I'm not going to go into lots of detail about the knock-on effect that this has with other hormones. It's really complex. It's a complete rabbit hole and probably not for this afternoon. And apart from anything, this falling off a cliff graph makes me feel a little bit miserable. So I'm going to move on quickly to medical menopause. So what is medical menopause? Well, the first example of a medical menopause is surgery. So a total hysterectomy where both the womb and the ovaries are removed, and this will induce the menopause. Even with one or both ovaries intact, you may start the menopause within 5 years. So I mentioned at the beginning of my presentation, the ovaries get some blood supply from the womb, and therefore they can die within 2 to 5 years. Medical or surgical treatments for endometriosis or severe PMS can also bring on early menopause. So this could either be the surgical removal of the ovaries or the shutting down of the ovaries with medication to treat those endometriosis and severe PMS symptoms. Also, use of chemotherapy and radiotherapy to treat cancer may bring on menopausal symptoms while you're having treatment. And with any of these, they will give a sudden start to symptoms. So you really, really should be given information before you start treatment. You certainly should be offered support, and ideally you should be referred to an expert. Okay, so early menopause and premature ovarian insufficiency. So what are they and why do they happen? So you would be described as having early menopause if your periods have stopped for more than a year and you're under the age of 45. If you're under 40, you might be diagnosed as having premature ovarian insufficiency or POI, and this is incredibly hard to deal with and has huge implications. So with POI, the ovaries stop working, you no longer reproduce the normal amount of hormones, therefore you may not produce eggs. Periods become irregular or stop altogether, and this can trigger symptoms of the menopause. Now, 1 in 100 women under 40 and 1 in 1,000 women under 30 are diagnosed with premature ovarian insufficiency. Menopause and beyond, there is life beyond. So with menopause and into those postmenopausal years, it's important to highlight that due to those hormonal changes that I've described and shared with you today, that there is an increased risk of cardiovascular disease. There is an increased risk of insulin resistance. There's also an increased risk of osteoporosis, so where our bones become weaker, making us more susceptible to fractures and breaks. And also there is an increase of systemic inflammation, which is the underlying cause of many chronic conditions. Now, the good news is that there are changes that we can make to diet and lifestyle that can certainly help reduce the risk and optimize our health, which brings me nicely onto what are our options. And there is good news, as I've said, because there are lots of lifestyle choices that we can make to minimize the impact of both perimenopause and menopause, and all of them have a place. So there are many ways to combat the effects and tailor them to you. Hormone replacement, HRT, it helps restore the hormone levels and can contain estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone. It's really important to maintain healthy lifestyle and diet, so certain foods and drink can impact symptoms. More from Beth on this later. And regular exercise improves our physical health, our mood, energy levels, and our heart and bone health. And Emily will be talking about that later in the series. CBT, cognitive behavioural therapy, absolutely has a place. I mentioned anxiety and depression earlier on. And of course, last but by no means least, there are lots of alternative therapies and herbal remedies out there. So please get online and do some research. So today, Beth is going to talk about maintaining a healthy lifestyle and nutrition. Caroline Smith is going to be talking about myofunctional therapy on the 18th of May. On the 25th of May, you've got Emily Sheridan to talk about how we should be moving our bodies, how to stay strong and healthy in menopause as part of weight management. Lastly, but by no means least, we've got Kate, who's a women's health and practice nurse, who will be going into HRT in more detail, and that's on June the 1st. So please sign up for these. There'll be great sessions, and hopefully you'll feel like with today's session from Beth and all of our subsequent sessions, that all of these options and lifestyle changes will be discussed in more detail. So that is it from me today. Thank you for listening. And I'm going to try and use the tech and hand over to Beth.
Okay, can everybody see that? Just give me a thumbs up. Yeah, perfect. Sorry, I realized I hadn't unmuted myself before I started. So thanks very much, Hayley. Hopefully that's given you a really good overview of perimenopause, menopause, and postmenopause. I'm a nutritional therapist with a special interest in hormonal and digestive health of women over 40. So I'm here to talk to you today about some simple things you can do in terms of nutrition to help support your health and reduce symptoms through perimenopause and beyond. Now, obviously, it's a huge topic. I could talk for hours about this. Indeed, I do entire courses just on perimenopausal nutrition. But what I'm aiming to do today is to give you some really simple, actionable things that you can go away and put into place. This is obviously all general advice. And it doesn't obviously replace any specific medical advice that you might need depending on your situation. So what I'm going to talk you through is how we can use nutrition to help restore hormonal balance. As we saw with the slides that Hayley went through, what happens particularly in perimenopause is we have these fluctuations in hormones. So we've got progesterone kind of starting to reduce. We've got estrogen reducing, but equally at some periods in perimenopause, estrogen levels can be up to 30% higher than they would be before you get into those perimenopausal years. And it's that kind of roller coaster of hormones that can contribute to a lot of the symptoms that women can suffer during perimenopause. So I'm going to talk to you about the importance of blood sugar balancing, really important during perimenopause, really important throughout your whole life actually, but particularly in relation to perimenopause, it can worsen symptoms if you've got poor blood sugar balance. I'm going to talk you through how to build a balanced plate with some visuals that hopefully will help you understand what to put on your plate. And also talk about a little bit about how you eat as well, not just what you eat and why that's important. And then hopefully at the end of that, you'll feel you've got an action plan I'm going to challenge you all to come up with 3 things that you can take away from today and start putting into place to support your health. As the Hayley and Emily said earlier, please do drop any questions you've got in the chat box as we go along. So first of all, another word cloud. I'm assuming many of you will recognize some of these symptoms or suffer with them either on a daily basis or ad hoc basis. And all these symptoms have something in common. So energy slumps, weight gain, inability to wake up in the morning, hot flushes, night sweats, mood swings, poor sleep patterns, nausea and cravings. All these can be linked to poor blood sugar management. So blood sugar balance is really important in perimenopause, as I say, particularly in terms of symptoms such as hot flushes, anxiety and energy levels. But it's important throughout your life to try and manage your blood sugar balance. And the reason for that is that our bodies don't like it when our blood sugar balance strays outside certain parameters. So ideally, your body wants the glucose, the sugar levels in your blood to remain stable. And that's represented in this graph by that green area that you can see in the middle there running across. If your levels get too high, then your body's like, whoa, that's not good. And it secretes a hormone called insulin, which you may well have heard of in relation to diabetes. Insulin is released in order to move the glucose in your blood from the blood into your cells. So it starts off by moving that glucose into the cells in your muscles and your other organs, where it's used as energy. So it opens up the gates to those cells and the glucose goes in. But once those cells have got enough glucose for their needs, those gates shut. If there's still glucose left in your blood sugar that's above the level your body wants, then it moves that glucose and stores it in the liver as a substance called glycogen, which you can kind of come back to later and release the glucose if you need it. And once, again, there's a limit to how much glycogen you can store in your liver. Once your liver's full, then it uses anything that's left that's above that level that it wants, as it stores it as fat, as adipose tissue. So that's why really it's not fat in your diet that can contribute to laying down fat. It's actually high levels of sugar. So when we eat foods that spike our blood sugar, you can see there where that black line represents your blood sugar level. If you eat some foods that release glucose, a lot of glucose quickly, that's when you get these spikes in your blood sugar level and you get insulin released in order to bring it back down. When you fall below that ideal green area, that's when you feel hungry and craving. So I don't know, as we sometimes talk about being hangry, when you feel really irritable and like you've got to get some sugar into you. And that's when we can end up on what we call in the nutrition world, the blood sugar roller coaster. So we've got these peaks and the insulin's introduced, and we've got a trough, then we grab something that's high in sugar and we're just on this up and down all day. And that really isn't good for us in terms of our energy, in terms of our mood, but also in terms of our contributing to a longer term risk of things like type 2 diabetes. So what we really are aiming for is, rather than being on this blood sugar roller coaster represented there by the red line, that we're trying to achieve through the way we eat a much more balanced blood sugar pattern, which is represented there by the green line. So a nice steady release of blood sugar. Now, that's all very well, but how do we do that? Well, there's lots of things that we can do that will contribute to managing our blood sugar in a better way. We can balance our macronutrients. So by macronutrients, I mean the proportion of protein, healthy fats, and carbohydrates that you eat. We can eat mindfully, which I'll come on to talk about a little bit later. Allowing time between meals. So rather than constantly snacking, where you're constantly hitting your body with food that then will turn to glucose, will then encourage insulin release, you're allowing your body to regulate between your meals. So ideally allowing 4 hours between meals. Avoiding processed carbohydrates, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. So it's those processed foods that tend to really spike our blood sugar levels. Eating breakfast. I see so many women who don't eat breakfast, but actually making sure you get a good balanced breakfast in within a couple of hours of waking can really help get you off to a good start and set you off on the right path for the rest of the day, rather than being on this roller coaster. And eating within a 12-hour window. So this really is about not necessarily fasting, but having an overnight fast of at least 12 hours, so that, again, we're not constantly hitting our body with food and glucose more than 12 hours a day. So what I tend to recommend to clients is, and I think everybody can achieve this, is to have a 12-hour overnight fast, so at least 12 hours between finishing your dinner in the evening and having your breakfast the next day. Some people do better with an even longer fast, but I'd say most people, we should be aiming for 12 hours. That's a good thing to try and achieve. So talking about macronutrients then, this chart here shows on the left-hand side there, you can see on the y-axis, the blood sugar response that you get. And then along the bottom, the time after eating, and it's split into the different macronutrients. So carbohydrates versus protein versus fat. And what you'll see there is that first spike you can see is carbohydrates in the yellow, and carbohydrates have a big impact on your blood sugar response. So 90 to 100% of carbohydrates will be turned into glucose, and they will spike 15 minutes to 2 hours after you've eaten them. Protein, which is the next curve in the orange, only half of that is turned into glucose, and that peaks 2 to 4 hours after you've eaten. And then fat along the bottom there in the blue has a very low impact on your blood sugar. So only about 10% of fat will be converted to glucose, and that's released really slowly over 8 to 10 hours. So one of the most beneficial things you can do in terms of managing your blood glucose levels is to make sure that you're eating a combination of protein, healthy fats, and carbohydrate at every meal. Now, the type of carbohydrates really matters. So I mentioned processed foods earlier. We really want to be eating carbohydrates that are what we call complex carbohydrates. So they are whole foods, essentially. So think vegetables, fruits, whole grains. Go for any food that's as close to its original state as you can, rather than highly processed foods that like cakes, biscuits, white pasta, white flour, bread. So if you're eating food that's as minimally processed as possible, then that's a really good thing. In terms of protein, you've obviously got animal protein, so fish or lean meat, but also vegetarian protein and vegan protein, if that's more appropriate for you. And then your healthy fats. Fat has been demonized for many years, but it's a really important part of our diet. So healthy fats, and by that I mean things like avocados, olive oil, that you find in eggs, coconut oil, not trans fats, not vegetable oils, but they're really important for not only managing blood sugar balance, but also for producing and supporting the detoxification of hormones, for supporting the health of our cell walls, so making sure that the cells can communicate properly between each other. And the particular type of fats, omega-3 fats, are also anti-inflammatory, and they are really beneficial in terms of overall reducing inflammation in the body. And omega-3 fats, a really good source of those is actually oily fish. So things like salmon, mackerel, anchovies, sardines. So it's a good idea to try and get those into your diet a couple of times a week if you eat fish. So that's, as I say, firstly, start with making sure you're eating protein, healthy fats, and carbohydrate with every meal or snack. The other thing that you can do is actually think about the order in which you eat those foods. So if you eat your non-starchy vegetables first, then the protein and fat, and make sure you're eating your starchy carbohydrates or the sugary foods after that, then that will also minimize the impact that those starchy carbohydrates and sugars have on your blood sugar balance. Breakfast, this is really key. As I say, I see a lot of women who don't eat breakfast. They might just have a black coffee on an empty stomach, which is not ideal. I'll talk about that in a little while when I cover caffeine. But having a breakfast that is well balanced, that includes protein and fats, as well as carbohydrates, will really get you off to a great start. So if you look on the left-hand side there, those are all breakfasts that are very carbohydrate rich. Even the fruit, although it's whole fruit and it has got the benefit of some fiber in it, it's going to spike your blood sugar if you're just eating fruit on its own. So if you look on the right-hand side there, you can see some options that are more balanced in terms of having protein and fat added in. So you've got eggs and avocado, I think that is on toast, an omelette, porridge, but porridge made with, you've got the fat from the milk or yogurt that you use, but they've also added nuts and seeds to help with the fats and the protein. And I think that one down on the bottom is a chia seed pudding. So think about how you can have a breakfast that has got protein in it. The other thing to say in terms of protein for breakfast is having protein at breakfast also helps with your sleep, because it helps with the production of melatonin, which is your sleepy hormone at the end of the day. And this chart here, this is a couple of graphs from when I wore a continuous glucose monitor. So I wore one for a couple of weeks, and it actually monitors your glucose levels. And this just shows you the difference between eating porridge, and this was nutritional therapist porridge. So it had lots of healthy stuff in it. It had nuts and seeds, berries, yogurt, and obviously my blood sugar stayed within range there, but you can see there's quite a noticeable spike even after eating healthy porridge, versus when I had a completely savory breakfast on the right hand side, which was just smoked salmon and avocado, which didn't impact my glucose levels at all. I just thought that was quite an interesting illustration. So how does that translate to lunch and dinner, your other meals? And this is a really good visual, I think. Don't worry about all the writing on there. I just want you to take out a couple of points here. So looking at that plate, you can see it's cut into quarters. What we want to be aiming for with every meal that we have is half of our plate should be leafy greens and salads or other vegetables that are non-root vegetables, so non-starchy vegetables. On the left-hand side, you can see there. Then we've got a quarter of our plate, which is root vegetables or whole grains, which is your kind of starchier carbohydrates. And we've got a quarter of the plate, which is protein, whether that's animal protein or vegetarian protein. The other thing to take out from this is eating a variety of fruit and vegetables. And in the nutritional world, we talk about 7 a day rather than 5 a day, with the focus being on vegetables. So 5 vegetables and 2 portions of fruit. Fruit is great, but obviously it's still much more sugary than vegetables, so we want to focus on the veg. And some recent research done as well, actually by Professor Tim Spector, showed that one of the best things you can do to support your microbiome, so the good bugs that live in your gut, is to eat 30 different types of plant food a week. That sounds quite a lot, but actually if you include things like herbs, nuts and seeds, then it is achievable. That's maybe a target you want to set yourself and see if you can do. But eating a variety of vegetables is really good in terms of your blood sugar balance, but also in terms of making sure your body has all the nutrients it needs to do all the amazing stuff that it does for you every day. So moving on from food to fluids, hydration is really important. At any stage of life, but again, thinking about perimenopause, where energy can be low, we can suffer more with headaches. Poor hydration can worsen those symptoms. And we know from studies that poor hydration is associated with fatigue and low energy. Muscle aches and headaches can contribute to lack of concentration and brain fog, constipation, and that's a big one. Again, I see quite a lot of women who will suffer with constipation, and apart from the fact that it's uncomfortable, having regular bowel movements is also really important for hormonal balance, because we excrete waste products from our waste hormonal products via the stool. So if you're not regularly passing a stool, then the chances are that you're contributing to your hormonal imbalance by not doing that. And counterintuitively, actually, you can suffer from fluid retention if you're not hydrated enough. So we should be aiming for between 1.5 and 2 litres of water a day. If you're really not a fan of water, then you can make it more interesting by, for example, adding herbs. Fresh mint's really nice in it, or fruit. I sometimes, if I've had strawberries and I cull them, I put the tops in water to flavour it. Herbal teas count. So if you like herbal teas, then they count towards your target of water a day. And I'd encourage you all to use a non-plastic water bottle as well, just because plastic contains chemicals which are xenoestrogens. And by that, I mean they are chemicals that mimic the action of estrogen in the body. So if we can reduce our exposure to those, then that's great. I actually have a metal water bottle that I use, or drink out of a glass, obviously. So what about caffeine? Now, these next two slides are probably my least popular slides. Lots of women wedded to their caffeine and wine, which we'll come on to talk about in a minute. In terms of caffeine, there are some upsides to caffeine. So some of the drinks that contain caffeine, specifically coffee and green tea, contain polyphenols, which are plant chemicals, basically. And they have some really great health benefits. They can help lower inflammation, improve insulin sensitivity, and improve our mood, concentration, and memory. But on the downside, caffeine specifically can elevate cortisol and adrenaline, which cortisol is our stress hormone. So if you are sensitive to stress, sensitive to anxiety, you may find that caffeine makes that worse, may contribute to anxiety, may give you palpitations. And cortisol also, because it's your stress hormone that gets you ready to either stand and fight or run away, encourages release of glucose into the blood. So it's not great for your blood sugar balance either, which is why I always say, if you're having coffee in the morning, drink it with your meal or after your breakfast. Don't have it on an empty stomach, because that food will just help minimize the impact of the caffeine in terms of your blood sugar. The other thing to bear in mind is that our ability to detoxify caffeine can decrease with age, and also with estrogen therapy. So for anyone who is on HRT, you may find that your ability to handle caffeine is reduced on HRT. As I say, avoid drinking on an empty stomach, and we all know that caffeine has a negative impact on sleep. So really, when it comes to caffeine, it's about trial and error. Some women find it worsens hot flashes and anxiety, while others find it might help. I would always say, don't drink on an empty stomach and limit your consumption to the morning. So if you can have a cutoff of midday, and after midday, you don't drink caffeinated drinks, and that's going to benefit your sleep. And in terms of coffee, again, if possible, choose organic, because they can use quite a lot of chemicals on the crops, the coffee crops, which aren't nice to be ingesting. So this is the slide that no one wants to hear about, the alcohol slide. I'm afraid when it comes to alcohol, it's all cons and no pros. We know that alcohol impairs estrogen metabolism. It's an extra load on your liver, and it's your liver that does all the work, detoxifying used hormones and, well, lots of other things. But it also, alcohol damages your gut microbiome as well. And a healthy microbiome is really important for health. Alcohol impacts your blood sugar. It's effectively just sugar with no nutritional value. So again, if you're drinking, do it with a meal, because that will help limit the impact it has on your blood sugar levels. And alcohol also has a negative impact on sleep. Now, you might find that often people will drink alcohol because it helps them relax and helps them drift off to sleep. It is a sedative, but it's not promoting natural sleep. When you're drinking alcohol, you get more awakenings throughout the night, which can leave you less refreshed. And we also know that it blocks REM sleep, that's rapid eye movement sleep. And that type of sleep is particularly important for emotional and mental health and memory. And it can also exacerbate night sweats. So if you suffer with night sweats, again, alcohol can make that worse. What else to say? We've probably all, if we drink, had the munchies every now and again. It can stimulate your appetite and lead to overeating. And alcohol shrinks your brain and can make it more difficult to build healthy bones and muscle. So when it comes to alcohol, I'm afraid really the message is limit it or stop consumption. A lot of women do find that in perimenopause, if they stop drinking, that can really help with their symptoms. Alcohol, as I say, in particular in terms of symptoms, can trigger hot flushes, anxiety, insomnia, and mood swings. And it does also increase your breast cancer risk. So that kind of covers what to eat and drink. Now I just wanted to touch on, before we finish up, why how you eat is also important. So we refer to this as mindful eating. And this is really about making sure that what you are putting in your mouth, you're getting the maximum benefit from. So rather than you are what you eat, well, you are what you assimilate, what you absorb. So it's about giving your digestive system the best chance to get the most out of your food. And in order to do that, we need to be in a state of rest and digest, where our parasympathetic nervous system is in control. So the first stage of digestion is called the cephalic phase, and that refers to the stage before we've even started eating. So it's when we're preparing food or anticipating food. The cephalic phase prepares the body for food. The smell and the sight of food stimulates secretion of saliva and digestive enzymes. And in order to promote that cephalic phase and promote this state of rest and digest, we need to take time to eat wherever we can. Again, I know in this day and age, we're all really busy. We're quite often eating on the go or eating at our desks, but I'd really encourage you all, wherever possible, to take time out to eat when you can. So take time to look and smell your food, try and be in a relaxed environment, sit down at a table, take a few deep breaths before eating, and chew properly. Again, this is something, a lot of people bolt their food, but chewing is a really important part of the digestion process. So you should be chewing each mouth of food anything between 20 and 30 times, depending on what food it is. And all that will help you extract the best nutritional value you can out of your food. So in summary, I've talked about 3 areas really for you to think about: managing your blood sugar effectively, which will help with all kinds of symptoms, eating protein, healthy fats, and complex carbohydrates with every meal or snack, eating breakfast and planning your breakfast so that it's got protein in it. And then we looked at the wellness solution in terms of the quadrants of the plate. Ensuring you're hydrated, so thinking about your water intake and also what you're going to do in terms of alcohol and caffeine, and then eating mindfully. So that's about taking time to eat and chewing properly. So that all it leaves for me to say really is, what 3 things could you take out of that you can put into place from today's session? And that is it from me. I'll just leave that on there for anyone in case they want extra contact details. And I'll hand back to Emily, who I think is the master of the questions.
Yes, Beth, I've got a couple for you here actually.
Okay.
Is decaf tea okay?
Okay, so decaffeinated tea does have less caffeine in it, but it still does have a little bit of caffeine in it. But yes, it's better than caffeinated. So that the other thing I would say, if you are thinking about reducing your caffeine intake, do it gradually if you drink quite a lot of caffeine, because you will get withdrawal symptoms. So it's something to gradually reduce over time. So decaf is better than caffeinated for sure. But ideally you'd go for completely naturally uncaffeinated drinks, which is herbal teas, Red Bush, that kind of thing.
Cool. Where does dairy fit into the wellness plate?
So dairy can fit in terms of your protein. Let me just go back actually. If I go back, it is on there. In fact, I'll put this up because it's probably, yeah. So you can see there's a little circle for dairy on the protein section. What I would say in terms of dairy is full fats. In terms of yogurts, not everybody likes full fat milk, but semi-skimmed. And I tend to recommend organic as well where possible with dairy, just because, again, of the estrogen and the potential nasties in terms of antibiotics and stuff that they use sometimes with the cows. And organic milk isn't that much more expensive than regular milk.
Okay. And just a comment, it was sad to see wine being even worse than originally thought. I know it is, it's horrible, but it's more about moderating as well, isn't it? I always think, than completely giving things up, because when we give everything up, it's what we crave or what we want more.
Yes. It is, and it's about making an informed choice. So you can choose to drink wine. I would never say don't drink wine, but if you are drinking it, be aware of how it makes you feel when you drink it and during the night and the day after, and see if you notice a difference. And also, if you are going to drink wine, then do it with a meal rather than just going out and having a massive bender and drinking loads of drinks.
And what type of breads and pastas are best? Wholemeal?
Yeah, so ideally whole meal. And as I say, it's people ask me this a lot. The way I always think about it is try and buy foods with the least number of ingredients in them as possible. So make your food, use ingredients to make your food rather than buying foods that have lots of ingredients in them, because you know if they've got lots of ingredients in them, they're processed. And aim for it as close to its original state as possible. So that would be wholemeal. I know there's a big thing, isn't there, about sourdough. I don't know how much better sourdough is than whole grain bread. But it's also about the proportions. So about, yes, have your bread, but don't make that the main part of your meal.
Okay. And does gluten affect us differently as we enter menopause?
Interesting one. I don't know. I'm not aware of any research that shows that specifically. What I would say is gluten is an individual thing. So obviously there are some people who have celiac disease and they are actually allergic to gluten, as in it damages their gut if they eat it. But there is also another condition, I suppose, would you call it a condition of non-celiac gluten sensitivity. So people who aren't actually celiac is an autoimmune disease, but still are sensitive to gluten and find they do better not eating gluten. In my experience, if you think gluten doesn't agree with you, then rather than buying gluten-free products, which again are massively processed, I would opt for things that naturally don't have gluten in. So for example, I don't eat gluten. I don't buy gluten-free bread. I have oat cakes. So picking something that's already not got, rather than buying a gluten-free option, which has probably got loads of other nasties in it.
Yeah. And with reference to nasties, I always think if I can't pronounce the name of something, probably shouldn't go in.
Yeah. Or if it's not something that you could have as an ingredient in your kitchen cupboard, then it's probably not great. Now, if it sounds like something from a lab rather than a kitchen cupboard, then it's probably not the best thing to be eating.
Nice, easy rule of thumb. What type of foods in general would keep up our energy levels?
Okay, so it's about balancing, really. So you need to bear in mind what you're doing, but you will have more stable, longer lasting energy if you're including protein and fats rather than just going for the carbs. So the carbs will give you a hit of energy, but then you'll get that drop off afterwards. So it's that classic mid-afternoon slump where 2-3 hours after lunch, you're like, oh, I need coffee or I need a chocolate bar. So focusing on making sure you've got adequate protein and fats as well as the carbs is a good thing, I would say.
Okay. I always think it's interesting as well. We always think, of having sweets and desserts after dinner and things. Does sugar keep us awake as well? Kind of, keep your energy going before bed?
Yeah, it does. And there's that whole thing with, you'll know about this, Emily, that with athletes who are going to do something really strenuous, they carb load, don't they? Because they need that energy. But what you want to avoid doing is having the carbs and then not using them, because then all that happens is they get stored as fat. If you're going to have a dessert, that's not necessarily a problem. You need to think about how often you're having it. But having it at the end of your meal makes sense, because you've already then hopefully had your protein and your fats and your good carbs to minimize the impact of that. But also as well, think about, if you do like a sweet treat, think about things like switching from milk chocolate to dark chocolate. So it's got a lower sugar content. It's more bitter, so you're probably not going to be able to eat as much of it, although I have trained myself quite well. And there's lots of benefits to dark chocolate as well, because it's full of polyphenols, it's a good source of magnesium. So it's about thinking about the healthier version of that. But I would never say don't ever eat anything sweet.
Okay.
Because like you say, if you're restricting yourself, you're more likely to crave it then.
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely. What type of rice is best, please?
Okay, so this is a bit of there isn't a straight answer on here. From a blood sugar balancing perspective, you'd say whole grain rice, but some people can find that more challenging to digest because the kind of outer coating for some people can be problematic. So if you're an IBS type person, if you suffer from bloating, some people find white rice is much easier to digest than whole grain rice, but whole grain rice is better from a blood sugar balance perspective. So I think it's really trial and error. If you are having white rice, obviously make sure you're eating it with protein and fats and you're not having huge mounds of it, because that will spike your blood sugar.
And is basmati better than
I
standard?
don't know the answer. I don't know is the answer to that, to be honest.
And yes, this presentation will be shared in answer to that question. And are soya products any good?
So this is in terms of perimenopause, is it? Yeah. So this is about phytoestrogens. So there are certain plants that contain estrogen-like substances, and one of those is soy. But again, it depends on the type of soy, and there's all kinds of there's all been all chat many years about how Japanese women, for example, don't tend to suffer as badly with menopausal symptoms, and is that linked to the amount of soy they eat? And again, it's not conclusive, the evidence, but I would say that as a kind of overall recommendation, yes, soy can be good in the diet and can help, but it's about the type of soy. So again, if it's edamame beans, or if it's they actually have like a fermented soybeans product in Japan, which I don't think most people want to eat. It's called natto and it stinks. But it's about having minimally processed soy rather than some kind of like very processed soy yogurt or that kind of thing. So soy can help, but it needs to be as natural as possible in terms of the form of it.
Gotcha. Do you recommend taking supplements in menopause?
Depends on the individual. Yes, they can be really beneficial, but I work one-to-one with clients, and supplements would generally form a part of that, but it will entirely depend on the individual person's situation, their diet, what medication they're on, their health history. So it's a bit of a tricky one, that, to be honest. Okay.
This one is about milk. Because there are lots of different milks on the market nowadays. Is it just about individual taste, or are there some best to avoid and others that are better to use?
So again, I'd encourage you all to look at what's in those milks. Dairy, from a nutritional perspective, cow's milk is probably the most nutritionally dense milk you're going to get, but equally a lot of people struggle with dairy. So if you struggle with dairy, then there are options in terms of, there's almond milk, isn't there, soy milk, coconut milk, but I would look at what other ingredients there are in those milks, because a lot of them have added vegetable oils and things. Other than that, it's really preference. I mean, oat milk is really just oats soaked in water, and they quite often have vegetable oils added to them. It's preference really, but be aware of what else is in there. I tend to use coconut milk myself, because it's just the most natural.
Right. Okay.
Because you can buy coconut milk that's literally just coconut and water.
Right. Oh, okay. Thank you. That's really, really useful. I have one question, because I've got my water bottle right here, but it's hard plastic. It's hard. Yeah. When you say no plastic, do you mean what, like when we buy it in the shop, or is that not very good?
It's not ideal. I mean, there was all the thing, wasn't there, about BPA and having non-BPA plastics, but I would still say you're better off with a metal bottle, or just drinking out of a glass, because, for example, if you're out training and the sun's shining on it, it's just that potential risk of the chemicals leaching into your water. In the same way that I would encourage people to not use plastic food containers. That's not always possible, but certainly don't heat food in plastic containers in the microwave, because I think there's just more of a risk. It's when that heat gets introduced that there's more of a risk of them leaching into the food. And the same with water bottles that you buy in a shop. Okay, you pick it up from the refrigerated cabinet, but you don't know how it's been stored before it's got to the store. It could have been sat outside on in a pallet in the sun for a week. And it's not to be paranoid about this stuff. You know,
No.
you can get obsessive about it, but just all these little things can build up to a bigger benefit.
Lovely.
So yeah, get yourself a nice metal water bottle.
I will. Any chance to shop online, hey?
Yeah.
Thank you, Hayley. Thank you, Beth. Thank you, everybody, for being here. And Beth's details are in the email that we sent through, and we are here for the next 3 Wednesdays. Next week is Caroline Smith, functional hygienist. Please join us. She's going to talk about respiration. So following on really nicely from where Beth just finished off. So thank you. Have a lovely afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.